The engine hummed steadily as we rolled through the pre-dawn darkness, the headlights carving a narrow tunnel through the black. My girlfriend Sarah was slouched in the passenger seat, her hoodie pulled tight around her face, scrolling through her phone until the signal bars vanished. We were on our way to a cabin in the Adirondacks, a last-minute getaway I'd booked to shake off the grind of our jobs in Albany. I worked at tea for a hospital, staring at screens until my eyes burned. Sarah was a paralegal, buried in case files and court deadlines. The cabin was supposed to be our reset, a chance to breathe without emails or clients breathing down our necks. But at 1:03 a.m., somewhere on a secondary road off Route 28, our GPS froze. The screen showed a spinning circle, the words "searching for signal" mocking us in the dim glow of the dashboard. I tapped the screen, hoping it would snap out of it. Nothing. Sarah glanced over, her brow furrowing. She'd been quiet most of the drive, tired from a late night prepping documents. I could tell she was already regretting the trip, especially since we'd left later than planned after her boss dumped a last-minute contract on her desk. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to stay calm, but the darkness felt heavier now, pressing against the windows. The road was unmarked, no lines or reflectors, just a ribbon of cracked asphalt swallowed by pines and scrub on both sides. We hadn't seen another car in over an hour, and the last gas station was a memory from 30 miles back. Sarah pulled out the folded map we'd grabbed from a rest stop, but it was useless without a clear idea of where we were. The GPS had been our lifeline, and now it was dead. I slowed the car, my hands tight on the wheel, scanning for a road sign, a mile marker, anything. That's when I saw it. A rusty metal sign, leaning slightly, caught in the edge of the headlights. Detour, Mill Creek, 12 miles. I didn't know any Mill Creek, and it wasn't on our route to the cabin, which was supposed to be near Lake George. Sarah leaned forward, squinting at the sign. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her unease, mirroring my own. We'd both heard stories, muggings, carjackings, people disappearing on back roads like this. Upstate New York wasn't exactly a crime hub, but you didn't need to be in a city for things to go wrong. I eased off the gas, letting the car coast. "Should we take it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Sarah shifted in her seat, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. She was always the practical one, the one who'd map out every step of a plan, but now she just stared at the sign, her fingers twisting the drawstring of her hoodie. "I don't know," she said finally. "If we keep going straight, we might end up nowhere. But that detour, it doesn't feel right." Her voice had an edge, the kind she got when she was trying not to sound scared. I nodded, but my gut was churning. The idea of turning onto an unknown road with no signal and no one around made my skin crawl. But staying on this endless stretch wasn't much better. I flicked on the high beams, hoping for a better view. But the light only made the shadows sharper, the trees looming like silent sentinels. That's when I noticed the headlights in the rearview mirror. They were faint, far back, but unmistakable. A pair of pale orbs bobbing in the distance. Another car. My first instinct was relief. We weren't alone out here. But then I realized it was keeping pace, not closing the gap, just hovering at the edge of sight. I pressed the accelerator slightly, watching the speedometer creep from 45 to 50. The lights stayed the same distance behind us. Sarah noticed me glancing at the mirror. "What's wrong?" she asked, turning to look out the back window. I didn't want to worry her, but my mouth was dry. "There's a car back there," I said, trying to sound casual. "Been there for a minute." She twisted further, her hand gripping the headrest. "How long?" she asked, her voice tight. I shrugged, not wanting to admit I'd been watching it for the last mile. "Not sure. Just keeping an eye on it." She didn't say anything, but she sat back, her hands now clasped tightly in her lap. We reached the turnoff for the detour, a narrow road that disappeared into a tunnel of trees. The sign looked older up close, the paint chipped, the letters uneven. I slowed again, my foot hovering over the brake. "What do you think?" I asked, glancing at Sarah. Her eyes were fixed on the side mirror now, watching the distant headlights. "I don't like it," she said softly, "but we can't just keep driving blind." She was right, but the thought of turning onto that road made my chest tight. The car behind us was still there, not speeding up, not falling back. It felt deliberate, like it was waiting for us to decide. I took a deep breath and turned the wheel, easing onto the detour. The road was rougher, the asphalt pocked with potholes that jolted the car. The trees closed in, their branches scraping the roof like fingers. Sarah reached for the radio, maybe to break the silence, but it was just static, the signal as dead as the GPS. I kept glancing at the rear view, expecting the other car to follow us, but the headlights didn't appear. For a moment, I thought we'd lost it. Then, as we rounded a bend, I saw them again, fainter, but still there, matching our pace. My palms were slick on the wheel now. Sarah was staring out her window, her reflection pale in the glass. "They're still following us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The road narrowed further, the trees so close I could hear the occasional snap of a branch against the side mirror. There were no signs, no mile markers, just the endless black of the road and the faint glow of those headlights behind us. I tried to focus on driving, but my mind was racing. Who was in that car? Why hadn't they passed us or turned off? Were they lost too, or was this something else? Sarah's hand found mine on the gear shift, her fingers cold. "Maybe we should turn around," she said. I wanted to agree, but the road was too narrow, with no shoulder to pull over, and something about going back toward that car felt worse than moving forward. "Let's keep going," I said, more to convince myself than her. "There's got to be a town or something up ahead." She didn't respond, but her grip on my hand tightened. The air in the car felt thick, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional thud of a pothole. My eyes darted between the road and the rear view, the headlights still there, unyielding. I started to notice small things. The way the air smelled faintly of damp earth, like something had been dug up nearby. The way the trees seemed to lean inward, their shadows twisting in the high beams. Sarah was breathing shallowly now, her eyes flicking to the side mirror every few seconds. I wanted to say something to calm her, but my own heart was pounding too hard. After what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, the road widened slightly, and a faint glow appeared ahead. A streetlight maybe, or the edge of a town. My shoulders relaxed a fraction, but then I saw the headlights in the mirror again, closer now. Not close enough to make out the car, but definitely nearer than before. I pressed the gas, the speedometer climbing to 55, then 60. The road was still rough, the car rattling with every bump. But I didn't care. I just wanted to reach that light. Sarah's voice broke the tension. "They're getting closer," she said, her tone sharp with panic. I didn't look back, didn't want to confirm it. "It's probably nothing," I said, but the words felt hollow. The glow ahead grew brighter, and soon we saw it. A gas station, its neon sign flickering, the only sign of life in miles. I pulled into the lot, my hands shaking as I parked under the brightest light. The other car didn't follow. I watched the road through the rear view, waiting for those headlights to appear, but they were gone. Sarah let out a shaky breath, her hands still clenched in her lap. "What the hell was that?" she asked, turning to me. I shook my head, unable to answer. The gas station was empty, the clerk inside barely glancing up from his phone as we sat there, catching our breath. I got out to check the GPS again, hoping the signal had returned. It hadn't, but the map on Sarah's phone finally loaded, showing we were only a few miles from a main road that would take us back to Route 28. We didn't talk much as we got back on the road, following the phone's directions this time. The detour had taken us in a loop, somehow spitting us out closer to our original route. The cabin was only an hour away now, but neither of us felt like celebrating. Sarah kept checking the mirrors, and I couldn't stop glancing at the empty road behind us. The rest of the drive was uneventful, the cabin just as we'd expected. Cozy, quiet, with a view of the lake. But as we unpacked, I noticed Sarah kept her phone close, its screen lit up with the map app, even though we didn't need it anymore. That night, lying in the dark, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the cabin was too much like the silence of that road. I kept thinking about those headlights, the way they'd stayed just out of reach, never closing in but never letting us go. I told myself it was nothing, just another driver lost in the night, maybe as scared as we were. But when I closed my eyes, I could still see them, hovering in the distance, waiting for us to make the wrong turn again. The road was a black ribbon under a starless sky, stretching out like it had no end. I was driving back from a shoot in a nowhere town called Mill Hollow, a place so small it barely registered on the map. I'd spent the day photographing a crumbling textile mill for a magazine piece on forgotten industries, my camera bag still heavy with lenses and memory cards in the passenger seat. It was pushing 11 p.m., and I was bone tired, my eyes stinging from hours of squinting through a viewfinder. I just wanted to get back to my apartment in Asheville, take a hot shower, and crash. But then, somewhere on a lonely stretch of hollow road in western North Carolina, the car lurched with a sickening thud. A sharp jolt ran through the steering wheel, and I knew before I even pulled over that I'd blown a tire. I eased the car onto the gravel shoulder, the crunch under the wheels loud in the silence. The headlights lit up a patch of road ahead, but beyond that, it was just darkness. No houses, no streetlights, just the faint outline of pines looming on both sides. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, my pulse already ticking up. I'd changed a tire before. My dad had made sure of that when I got my first car at 17. But doing it alone, at night, on a road like this? My stomach twisted at the thought. I'd grown up hearing stories about women stranded on back roads, the kind of stories that stuck with you. Muggings. Worse. My mom used to call me every time I took a solo job, reminding me to keep my doors locked, to stay alert. I could almost hear her voice now, sharp with worry. I grabbed my phone to call roadside assistance, but the screen showed no bars. Of course. Mill Hollow was a dead zone, and this road was even farther out. I muttered a curse and popped the trunk, stepping out into the cool night air. It smelled faintly of pine and damp earth, the kind of smell that should have been calming but wasn't. My sneakers crunched on the gravel as I hauled out the spare tire, jack, and lug wrench, my movements quick but clumsy. The darkness pressed in, heavy and thick, broken only by the faint red glow of my taillights. Every rustle in the trees, a squirrel maybe, or just the wind, made my head snap up, scanning the shadows. I was kneeling by the front right wheel, struggling with the first lug nut, when I saw the headlights. They appeared in the distance, faint at first, like twin moons low on the horizon. My heart lifted for a second. Another car meant I wasn't alone out here. But then the lights slowed, and a pickup truck pulled over about 20 yards back, its engine idling. I froze, the wrench cold in my hand. A man got out, his silhouette dark against the glare of his headlights. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He started walking toward me, his boots scuffing the gravel. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, trying to look calm even though my pulse was hammering. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, and called out, asking if I needed help. His voice was steady, almost too steady, like he was reading from a script. I forced a smile, the kind I'd perfected for dealing with pushy clients, and told him I was fine, just finishing up. He nodded but didn't move, his face half hidden under the cap. Something about the way he stood there, not quite looking at me but not looking away either, made my skin prickle. It was like he was studying me, sizing me up. I went back to the tire, my hands shaking now as I worked the wrench. I told him again, a little firmer, that I had it under control, thanks anyway. He said something about it being late, about how he'd hate to leave me out here alone, just in case. His tone was polite, but there was an edge to it, a weight that made my chest tighten. I didn't look up, just kept turning the wrench, the metal creaking with each twist. The lug nuts were stubborn, rusted from years of neglect, and my arms were starting to ache. All I could think about was getting back in the car, locking the doors, and driving away. The man didn't go back to his truck. Instead, he stepped off the road, into the grass, and just stood there, maybe 10 feet away, watching. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I didn't dare look. The air felt heavier now, the silence broken only by the low hum of his truck's engine and the occasional chirp of crickets. My mind was racing, piecing together worst-case scenarios. I'd read about this kind of thing, guys who preyed on stranded drivers, who waited for moments like this. I thought about my camera bag, the thousands of dollars worth of gear inside. Was that what he wanted? Or was it something else? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the tire, but my hands were slick with sweat, making the wrench slip. I finally got the old tire off and rolled the spare into place, my breath coming in short bursts. The man was still there, motionless, his silhouette a dark smudge against the trees. I wanted to yell at him to leave, but I didn't. I didn't want to escalate things, didn't want to give him a reason to come closer. Instead, I worked faster, lining up the spare, tightening the new lug nuts as quickly as I could. My knuckles scraped against the wheel, the pain sharp but distant, drowned out by the adrenaline. I kept expecting him to say something else, to move, but he didn't. He just watched, his presence like a weight on my back. When I finally lowered the jack and tossed the tools in the trunk, my legs were trembling. I glanced at him as I walked to the driver's side, trying to memorize his outline. Tall, maybe 6 feet, dark jacket, cap pulled low. I didn't see his face clearly, and part of me was glad for that. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine, my hands fumbling with the keys. The man didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there as I pulled back onto the road. In the rearview mirror, I saw his truck's headlights flick on, and my stomach dropped. He was following me. I gripped the wheel, my eyes darting between the road and the mirror. The truck stayed about 100 yards back, its lights steady, not gaining but not falling away either. The road was still empty, no other cars, no signs of civilization. I thought about speeding up, but the spare tire wasn't meant for high speeds, and the last thing I needed was another blowout. My phone was still useless, the screen dark except for the low battery warning. I tried to remember how far it was to the nearest town, but my brain was foggy, the fear making it hard to think straight. I'd always been independent, maybe stubbornly so. Growing up, I was the kid who'd rather figure things out herself than ask for help. It was why I'd gone freelance, why I took jobs like the one in Mill Hollow, driving to places most people avoided just to get the perfect shot. But out here, that independence felt like a liability. I thought about my sister, back in Raleigh, who'd begged me to get a better car, one with roadside assistance built in. I thought about my ex, who'd always said I took too many risks. Maybe they were right, but it didn't matter now. All that mattered was getting off this road. After what felt like an eternity, a faint glow appeared ahead, a gas station, its sign flickering like a beacon. I pressed the gas a little harder, the spare tire thumping unevenly. The truck was still behind me, its headlights a constant in the mirror. I pulled into the gas station lot, parking under the brightest light I could find. The truck didn't follow. I sat there, engine idling, watching the road. The headlights slowed, then turned, disappearing down a side road I hadn't even noticed. My hands were still shaking as I cut the engine, the silence rushing in. The gas station was open, a tired-looking clerk inside sorting cigarette packs. I thought about going in, telling him what happened, but what would I say? A guy offered to help and then followed me? It sounded paranoid, even to me. I checked my phone again, still no signal. I sat there for a while, maybe 20 minutes, waiting for my heart to slow down. The road stayed empty, no sign of the truck. Eventually, I started the car and drove on, following the signs back to the main highway. The rest of the trip was uneventful, the lights of Asheville a relief when they finally appeared. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and checked it twice, something I hadn't done in years. I didn't sleep much that night, my mind replaying the man's silhouette, the way he'd stood there, watching. I kept wondering why he didn't leave, why he followed me. Was he just a creep, or was there something else? I thought about checking the local news for stories about that road, but I didn't. Part of me didn't want to know. The next day, I took the car to a mechanic, got the tire fixed. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be. But every time I drive at night now, I check the rearview mirror more than I used to, half expecting to see those headlights again, waiting just out of reach. The dashboard clock read 2:14 a.m. when I spotted the sign, its edges curled and faded, caught in the sweep of my headlights. Detour, shortcut to town, it read, the letters scrawled in black paint, uneven like someone had written it in a hurry. I was on a back road in southern Ohio, heading home to Columbus after a long weekend visiting my sister in Cincinnati. The drive was supposed to be straightforward, just a few hours on familiar highways, but a construction closure had forced me onto this winding secondary road, all cracked asphalt and looming trees. I was tired, my eyes gritty from too much coffee and not enough sleep, and the idea of a shortcut was too tempting to ignore. My sister Claire had warned me about taking unfamiliar routes at night. Her paranoia came from years of true crime podcasts, but I brushed it off. I just wanted to get home, crawl into bed, and forget the argument we'd had about my job, my life, my tendency to push people away. The road was narrow from the start, barely wide enough for 2 cars, with gravel shoulders that crunched under the tires. I turned off the podcast I'd been listening to, a history show about old railroads, because the signal kept cutting out, leaving me with just the hum of the engine and the occasional hoot of an owl. The trees grew denser as I drove, their branches knitting together overhead, blocking out what little moonlight there was. My phone's GPS was useless out here, the screen stuck on a blank map, and the paper map in the glove box was outdated, barely legible in the dim light. I figured the shortcut would lead to a main road soon enough, maybe a gas station where I could reorient myself. About 10 minutes in, the road started to twist, sharp bends that forced me to slow down. The gravel became patchier, replaced by packed dirt in places, and the trees pressed closer, their trunks like silent sentinels in the dark. I could smell damp earth through the cracked window, mixed with the faint tang of motor oil from my old hatchback. I'd been meaning to get it serviced, but my freelance graphic design gigs barely covered rent, let alone car repairs. Claire had offered to help, but I'd snapped at her, too proud to take her money. Now, as the road grew rougher, I regretted not listening to her about a lot of things. Our fight had been about more than just money. She thought I was isolating myself, taking risky jobs to avoid dealing with my problems. Maybe she was right, but out here, that didn't help me. The road kept winding, each turn sharper than the last, and I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake. There were no signs of a town, no lights on the horizon, just more trees and the endless ribbon of dirt. My hands tightened on the wheel, the plastic worn smooth from years of use. I thought about turning around, but the road was so narrow I wasn't sure I could manage it without getting stuck. Besides, going back felt like admitting defeat, and I'd always been stubborn like that. It was why I'd left my hometown, why I'd gone freelance instead of taking a stable office job like Claire wanted. I wanted to prove I could make it on my own, even if it meant nights like this, alone in the dark with a car that might not make it. Then the car died. No warning, no sputter, just a sudden lurch and silence, the dashboard lights flickering out. I turned the key, but the engine didn't even try, just clicked uselessly. My heart sank, a cold knot forming in my chest. I was in the middle of nowhere, no signal, no lights, just trees and darkness. I tried the key again, pumping the gas pedal like I'd seen my dad do when I was a kid, but nothing happened. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint creak of the car settling on the uneven ground. I sat there, hands tight on the wheel, trying to think. I knew cars, a little, enough to check the battery or look for a loose wire, but not out here, not in the dark. That's when I heard it. A crunch, like footsteps on gravel, coming from somewhere behind the car. My breath caught, and I froze, straining to listen. Another crunch, then another, slow and deliberate, circling around to the passenger side. My first thought was an animal, deer maybe, or a raccoon, but the rhythm was too steady, too human. I flicked on the headlights, hoping to catch whatever it was, but the beams only lit up the road ahead, a narrow path disappearing into the trees. Nothing moved, no eyes glinted back, just empty road and shadows. I locked the doors, the click loud in the quiet. My pulse was racing now, my mind jumping to every horror story I'd ever heard about stranded drivers. I'd grown up in a small town, not far from here, where kids swapped tales about hitchhikers who weren't what they seemed, or locals who didn't take kindly to outsiders. My high school friends used to dare each other to drive out to old logging roads, places like this, to see who'd chicken out first. I never went, but I'd laughed at the stories, thinking they were just kids, trying to scare each other. Now, those stories didn't feel so funny. I thought about my parents, still in that small town, probably asleep in their recliners with the TV on. I hadn't called them in weeks, too caught up in my own life. If something happened out here, would they even know? The footsteps came again, closer now, maybe 10 feet away, crunching on the gravel near the rear of the car. I didn't dare look back, didn't want to see what might be there. Instead, I fumbled for my phone, hoping for a miracle signal, but the screen was dark. The battery drained faster than it should have. I cursed myself for not charging it at Claire's, for not planning better. The air felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick, and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Another crunch, this time from the driver's side, just outside my window. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was a hiker, I told myself, or someone from a nearby house checking on a stranded car. But who'd be out here at this hour, in the middle of nowhere? I thought about my last big project, a logo for a local brewery that had taken weeks of revisions. The client had been a nightmare, nitpicking every detail, but I'd pushed through because I needed the money. It was always like that, scraping by, taking jobs I hated to keep my freedom. Claire didn't get it. She thought I should settle down, get a real job. But I loved the work, even when it was hard, even when it meant driving to the middle of nowhere for a gig. Out here, though, that freedom felt like a trap. I was alone, no one knew where I was, and something was circling my car. I turned on the high beams, hoping to scare off whatever was out there. The light cut deeper into the woods, illuminating twisted branches and patches of underbrush, but still no one. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, I thought I'd imagined them. Then they started again, slower, moving back toward the rear of the car. My mind raced, picturing someone out there, watching, waiting. I thought about the knife in my glove box, a small one I kept for cutting packaging tape on deliveries. It was better than nothing, but the idea of using it made my stomach churn. I wasn't a fighter. I was just a guy who liked to draw, who thought he could handle anything. I tried the engine one more time, turning the key with a desperation I hadn't felt since I was a teenager, stuck in a dead-end job in a dead-end town, promising myself I'd get out. The engine coughed, then caught, roaring to life with a shudder that made me gasp. I didn't wait. I slammed the car into gear and hit the gas, the tires spinning on the gravel before catching. The road was still narrow, the trees scraping the sides of the car as I sped up, not caring about the branches or the potholes. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone, or something, standing in the road, but it was empty, just darkness swallowing the light from my taillights. The footsteps were gone, replaced by the whine of the engine and the thump of my pulse in my ears. I drove faster than I should have, the car rattling with every bump, until the road widened and the trees started to thin. My hands were still shaking, my shirt damp with sweat. I kept thinking about those footsteps, the way they'd circled the car, deliberate and unhurried. Was it someone playing a prank? Some local messing with a stranded driver? Or was it something else? Someone who knew no one would hear me out here? I didn't have answers, and I didn't want them. I just wanted to be anywhere else. After what felt like forever, I saw a sign for the main highway, a proper one this time, with reflective letters and a mile marker. I turned onto it, my breath coming easier as the road smoothed out. A few miles later, I spotted the lights of a 24-hour diner, its neon sign glowing like a lifeline. I pulled into the lot, parking under a streetlight, and just sat there, letting the engine idle. The diner was nearly empty, just a waitress wiping down counters and a trucker nursing a coffee. I thought about going in, asking if anyone else had taken that shortcut, but I didn't. What would I say? That I heard footsteps and got scared? It sounded ridiculous in the light of the diner's neon sign. I checked the car later, when the sun was up and I was safely back in Columbus. The battery was fine, the engine too. No reason for it to have died like that. I told Claire about it over the phone, leaving out the footsteps because I knew she'd freak out. She just sighed and told me to get a new car, like she always did. I laughed it off, but it felt forced. I haven't taken that road again, haven't even looked it up on a map. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I'll hear a faint crunch of gravel in my head, like an echo, and I'll check the mirrors, half expecting to see something in the dark. There's never anything there, but I keep the doors locked anyway and I don't take shortcuts anymore. Midnight had come and gone, the dashboard clock glowing 12:03 a.m. as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles pale against the dark plastic. I was driving home from a double shift at St. Mary's Hospital in rural Virginia, my scrubs still clinging to my skin, damp with the sweat of a 16-hour day. The country road, County 17, a 2-lane stretch of asphalt I'd driven 100 times, was quiet, its edges swallowed by dense forest. My eyes burned from staring at patient charts and monitors, my body aching from running between rooms during a chaotic night in the ER. All I wanted was to get to my apartment, microwave a frozen dinner, and collapse onto the couch. But then came the thud, sharp and jarring, followed by the telltale wobble of a flat tire. My heart sank as I eased the car onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching under a flickering streetlight that cast long, jagged shadows into the trees. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to steady my breathing. I knew how to change a tire. My dad had taught me years ago, back when I was a teenager in Roanoke, insisting I learn the basics before I could borrow his truck. He'd been a mechanic, always tinkering in the garage, and he'd made sure I could handle myself on the road. But knowing how didn't make the task any less daunting out here, alone, with the forest looming like a wall of black. The streetlight buzzed overhead, its light weak and stuttering, barely illuminating the hood of my old Civic. Beyond it, the woods were a void, the kind of dark that seemed to swallow sound as well as light. I'd grown up hearing stories about these back roads, hunters getting lost, drivers running into trouble with locals who didn't like strangers. My coworkers at the hospital swapped similar tales during night shifts, half joking about the weirdos who roamed the countryside. I'd always laughed it off, chalking it up to small-town gossip. But now, stranded under that flickering light, the stories felt too close. I cut the engine, the silence rushing in like a wave. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, with a faint metallic tang from the car. I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat, hoping to call roadside assistance, but the screen showed no bars. Typical. Cell service out here was spotty at best, and I was too far from the nearest tower. I muttered a curse under my breath, my voice sounding small in the quiet. My mom's face flashed in my mind. She'd always worried about me taking the night shift, especially since I lived alone now, after my breakup with Jake last year. He'd been a paramedic, someone I thought got the demands of my job, but his need to control everything had worn me down. We'd fought about my long hours, my stubborn streak, the way I'd push through exhaustion rather than ask for help. Now, as I sat in the dark, I wished I'd listened to Mom's nagging about getting a better car, one less likely to leave me stranded. I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my sneakers, and popped the trunk. The cold bit at my hands as I rummaged for the jack and lug wrench, my fingers brushing against the spare tire. Every sound seemed amplified, the creak of the trunk, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the faint buzz of the streetlight. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the light. The forest was silent, but it felt alive, watchful, like it was holding its breath. I told myself it was just exhaustion, the kind that made shadows look like threats. I'd been on my feet since morning dealing with a packed ER, car accident victims, a kid with a broken arm, an elderly man who'd coded twice before we stabilized him. My body was screaming for rest, but I couldn't stay here all night, not with the temperature dropping and no one knowing where I was. I was hauling the spare out of the trunk when I heard it. A creak, sharp and distinct, like someone stepping on a branch in the woods. I froze, the tire thumping against the ground, my heart slamming against my ribs. I stared into the trees, the streetlights' glow barely reaching their edges. Nothing moved, no glint of eyes or flicker of motion. Just darkness, thick and heavy. I waited, holding my breath, listening for another sound, but all I heard was the wind, low and mournful through the pines. I told myself it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a fox. This was Virginia, not some horror movie set. But my hands were shaking as I knelt by the front wheel, the lug wrench cold and heavy in my grip. I'd always been practical, the one who stayed calm when patients panicked, but out here, that calm was fraying. I started loosening the nuts, the metal groaning with each turn. My arms ached, my scrubs sticking to my back despite the chill. I kept my eyes on the wheel, but my ears were tuned to the forest, waiting for another creak. I thought about my patients, the ones I'd left behind tonight. The kid with the broken arm had cried when I adjusted his IV, his mom whispering, thanks through her own tears. It was moments like that that kept me going, even when the job drained me. I'd wanted to be a nurse since I was a kid, watching my aunt work in a clinic, her calm under pressure like a superpower. She'd passed away when I was in college, but I still carried her old stethoscope in my bag, a reminder of why I'd chosen this path. But out here, that purpose felt distant, replaced by a gnawing unease that made every shadow seem alive. Another creak came, this time closer, maybe 20 feet into the trees. I stopped, the wrench slipping in my hand, my breath catching. I squinted into the darkness, but the streetlight's flicker made it hard to see anything clearly. The shadows seemed to shift, like something was moving just out of sight. My mind raced, conjuring images of someone watching, a hunter maybe, or a drifter who'd seen my car pull over. I'd read about things like that, people targeting lone drivers on rural roads, especially women. My breakup with Jake had left me hyper-aware of being alone, of how vulnerable I was without someone to lean on. I'd moved to this town to start fresh, to prove I could make it on my own, but nights like this made me question that choice. I went back to the tire, working faster now, my hands fumbling with the lug nuts. The wrench slipped again, scraping my knuckles, and I bit back a curse. The creak came once more, softer, like it was moving away, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't look up, didn't want to give in to the fear that was clawing at my chest. I thought about my apartment, the cluttered little space I'd made my own after Jake moved out. The plants I kept forgetting to water, the stack of unopened mail on the counter, the photo of me and Mom at my nursing school graduation. I'd framed it to remind myself of what I'd accomplished, even when the long shifts made me feel like I was barely holding on. I just needed to get there, to lock the door and shut out this night. The spare was on now, and I was tightening the last nut when I heard another sound. A faint rustle, like leaves being brushed aside, closer to the road this time. My head snapped up, my eyes scanning the trees, but the streetlight flickered again, plunging the edge of the forest into darkness. I stood, the wrench still in my hand, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I waited, listening, but the sound didn't come again. The silence was worse somehow, like it was hiding something. I thought about getting back in the car and locking the doors, waiting until morning, but the idea of sitting there for hours, exposed, was unbearable. I'd always been the one to push through, to keep going even when things got tough. It was why I'd stayed in nursing, why I hadn't gone back to Roanoke when things with Jake fell apart. I lowered the jack, my movements quick and jerky, and tossed the tools in the trunk. The streetlight buzzed louder now, its flicker erratic, casting shadows that danced across the road. I slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors with a satisfying click. My hands were trembling as I turned the key, half expecting the engine to fail, but it started right up, the hum a small comfort. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone step out of the trees. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the fading glow of the streetlight. The drive home was quiet, the forest giving way to open fields, and then the outskirts of town. I kept checking the mirrors, my hands tight on the wheel, but no one followed. When I reached my apartment, I parked under the brightest streetlight in the lot, my heart still racing. I sat there for a minute, listening to the tick of the cooling engine, half expecting to hear that creak again. I didn't. The night was still, the town asleep. I grabbed my bag and hurried inside, locking the door behind me, checking it twice just to be sure. The next day, I took the car to a mechanic, expecting to hear about a nail or a shard of glass in the tire. He found nothing, just a clean puncture, like something sharp had been driven into it. I didn't mention the sounds in the woods, didn't want to sound crazy. I went back to work, back to the grind of the ER, but I started taking the longer route home, the one with more lights and traffic. I told a coworker about the flat, leaving out the creaks, and she just nodded, saying these roads could be spooky at night. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I'll hear a faint creak, like branches snapping, and I'll check the locks one more time. It's probably just the apartment settling or the wind outside, but I keep the curtains drawn anyway, and I don't drive County 17 after dark anymore. Dust swirled in the headlights, a faint red haze against the black of the Arizona night. I was driving alone on Route 66, somewhere west of Flagstaff, chasing stories for a freelance article on the road's fading motels and diners. The clock on the dash read 12:07 a.m., and my eyes were heavy from a long day of interviews and photos in a sun-bleached town called Seligman. I'd spent hours talking to old-timers about the glory days of the Mother Road, their voices thick with nostalgia, their eyes sharp with suspicion when I asked about local legends. I was used to that, being the outsider, the 29-year-old city girl poking into small-town secrets. My notebook was full of scribbled quotes, my camera bag heavy in the passenger seat. But all I wanted now was to reach my motel in Kingman, shower off the desert grit, and sleep. Then the car stuttered. A low whine came from the engine, followed by a clunk that made my stomach drop. I eased onto the shoulder, the tires crunching on gravel, and tried the key again. Nothing. The engine didn't even turn over. just clicked like a dead battery, though I'd had it checked before the trip. My phone was no help either. No bars, just a blank screen mocking me in the dim glow of the dashboard. I was miles from anything, the last gas station a hazy memory from an hour back. The headlights cut a narrow path through the dark, illuminating a stretch of cracked asphalt and dust, with scrub and cacti looming on either side. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint tick of the cooling engine and the occasional howl of wind across the desert. I sat there, hands tight on the wheel, trying to think. I'd grown up in Phoenix, where the desert was more backdrop than threat, but out here, it felt different, wilder, emptier. My dad used to warn me about driving alone, especially on trips like this, where I'd chase stories for weeks at a time. He'd been a cop, always seeing danger in the shadows, and his warnings stuck with me even now, 2 years after his heart attack. My mom was the opposite, always pushing me to take risks, to live the life she hadn't. She'd been the one to buy me my first camera, back when I was 15, dreaming of being a journalist. She'd beam when I'd show her my published pieces, even the small ones in local magazines. But neither of their voices helped now, not with the car dead and the desert stretching out like an endless void. I flicked on the interior light, hoping to calm myself, but it only made the darkness outside thicker. I thought about getting out to check the engine, but the idea of standing exposed on the road made my skin crawl. I'd heard enough from locals today. Whispers about travelers who'd vanished on this stretch, their cars found empty, keys still in the ignition. The stories were probably exaggerated, small-town lore to spook outsiders, but they gnawed at me. I locked the doors, the click loud in the quiet, and decided to wait. Maybe a trucker would pass by, or the engine would miraculously start. I just needed to stay calm, stay put. I thought about my best friend Lena, back in Phoenix, who'd laughed when I told her I was driving Route 66 alone. She'd called me fearless, but I didn't feel fearless now. I felt small, vulnerable, the kind of person my dad always worried I'd become out here. That's when I saw it. A figure, motionless, just at the edge of the headlight's reach. It was tall, human-shaped, standing on the shoulder about 30 feet away, where the asphalt met the scrub. My breath caught, my heart slamming against my ribs. I squinted, trying to make out details, but the figure was a silhouette, too far for the light to touch. It didn't move, didn't wave or approach, just stood there, facing the car. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a cactus or a signpost, but the shape was too distinct, too human. I'd spent enough time in the desert to know the difference. My hands shook as I checked the locks again, my eyes locked on the figure. I thought about my ex, Ryan, who'd always teased me about my solo trips, saying I was too stubborn for my own good. We'd split 6 months ago, after he got tired of my late nights and my obsession with chasing the next story. He'd wanted me to settle down, get a desk job, but I couldn't. The road, the stories, they were who I was. I turned on the high beams, hoping to see more, but the figure stayed just out of reach, a shadow against the dust. My mind raced. Could it be a hitchhiker? A local? Someone who'd seen my car and stopped to watch? The stories from Seligman came back, tales of people who'd broken down and never made it to the next town. One old man at a diner had leaned in close, his coffee breath warm on my face, and told me about a stretch of road where cars would just stop. No reason, no explanation. I'd written it off as folklore, but now with my engine dead and that figure out there, it didn't seem so far-fetched. I tried the engine again, turning the key with a silent plea. Still, nothing, just that dead click. The air in the car felt thick, my breath shallow as I watched the figure. It hadn't moved, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and unyielding, like it was studying me. Then came the knock, soft, deliberate, on the passenger side door. My heart stopped, my eyes darting to the window, but there was nothing there, just the empty road and the faint glow of the headlights. Another knock, this time from the rear, like someone tapping the trunk. I froze, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I didn't dare look back, didn't want to see what might be there. The knocks came again, slow and rhythmic, moving around the car, passenger side, rear, driver's side, then back again. It was like someone was circling, testing the handles, though I never heard the click of a latch. My mind flashed to my dad's old warnings about carjackers, about people who preyed on stranded drivers. He'd seen it all in his years on the force, and he'd drilled those lessons into me. Keep your doors locked. Don't stop for strangers. But this felt different. Less like a crime, and more like a game. Someone toying with me in the dark. I kept the doors locked, my eyes fixed on the figure ahead. It still hadn't moved, but the knocks continued, soft and insistent, like they were trying to draw me out. I thought about my mom, back in Phoenix, probably asleep in her recliner with a romance novel open on her lap. She'd always been proud of my work, clipping my articles from magazines, even the small ones. I hadn't called her in weeks, too caught up in deadlines and travel. If something happened out here, would she even know where to look? The thought made my chest tighten, the knocks growing louder in my ears. I tried to focus on the practical, on what I could do. I had a tire iron in the trunk, a flashlight too, but getting out meant facing whatever was out there. I stayed put, my breath fogging the window, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The knocks stopped for a moment, and I dared to hope it was over. But then they started again, softer, almost teasing, coming from the roof now, like someone tapping with a single finger. I thought about my last big story, a piece on abandoned mines in Nevada, where I'd hiked alone through crumbling tunnels, my camera slung around my neck. I'd felt alive then, fearless. But now that fearlessness was gone, replaced by a primal dread. I kept thinking about the local stories, their warnings about this stretch of Route 66. They'd talked about missing travelers, about cars found abandoned, but they'd never said what took them. My imagination filled in the gaps. Someone out there, waiting for people like me, people who thought they could handle the road alone. I thought about Lena, who'd be the first to notice I was gone if I didn't check in tomorrow. She'd always been my anchor, the one who'd drag me out for drinks when I got too lost in work. I wished I'd called her before I left Seligman, just to tell someone where I was. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time felt slippery in the dark. The figure was still there, unmoving, a constant in the corner of my vision. The knocks grew sporadic, sometimes stopping for long stretches, then starting again, always in a different spot. I tried the engine again, my hands trembling, but it was no use. I thought about running, but to where? The desert stretched for miles, and the figure was blocking the road ahead. I stayed put, my breath fogging the window, my heart pounding. I kept replaying the day, the faces of the people I'd interviewed, a waitress with a tired smile, an old mechanic who'd talked about the road like it was alive. They'd all warned me in their own way to be careful out here. I hadn't listened, too focused on the story, on proving I could do this alone. Then, finally, headlights appeared in the distance, coming from the opposite direction. A truck, its engine a low rumble, slowed as it approached. I watched the figure, expecting it to vanish, and it did. Just as the truck's lights swept over the spot, the silhouette was gone, like it had never been there. My chest loosened, but only slightly. The truck pulled over, its driver a heavy-set man in a flannel shirt, his face weathered under a baseball cap. He called out, asking if I needed help, his voice gruff but kind. I hesitated, then unlocked the door, my hand hovering over the latch. I told him my car wouldn't start, and he offered to take a look. As he poked around under the hood, He mentioned that this stretch of road was bad news, that locals avoided it after dark. People had gone missing, he said, their cars found empty, no trace of where they'd gone. He didn't elaborate, just shook his head and kept working. I didn't tell him about the figure or the knocks, didn't want to sound like I'd lost it. He got the engine going, a loose battery cable, he said, though I could have sworn I'd checked it before the trip. I thanked him, my voice shaky, and he just nodded, telling me to stick to the main roads from now on. I drove off, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure again. The road stayed empty, the truck's taillights fading behind me. I reached Kingman just before dawn, the motel's neon sign a small comfort. I checked into my room, locked the door, and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. I didn't sleep, just kept replaying the night, the figure, the knocks, the way the desert had felt alive, watching. The next day, I drove to a mechanic in town. He confirmed the battery cable had been loose, nothing else wrong. I didn't mention the figure or the knocks, didn't want to sound unhinged. I finished my article, sent it to the editor, and moved on to the next assignment. I told Lena about the breakdown over coffee a week later, leaving out the figure because I wasn't sure what I'd seen. She laughed, called me crazy for driving those roads alone, but her eyes were serious. I kept working, kept traveling, but I avoid that stretch of Route 66 now. When I'm on the road at night, I keep my eyes on the edges, where the headlights don't quite reach. I tell myself it was just exhaustion, a trick of the light, maybe a local messing with me. But when I close my eyes, I can still hear those knocks, soft and deliberate, echoing in the dark. Sometimes, when I'm editing photos from that trip, I'll zoom in on the backgrounds, looking for something I can't quite name, but there's never anything there. Just the desert, vast and silent, waiting.